What's going on, everybody? It's Chase with Semi-Pro's Garage, and today I'm out here to bring you guys a video that is going to be all about how to set up and route plumbing for those of you that have decided to do compressed air or CO2 setups on your turboed cars. So it's going to be all about the boost plumbing from your CO2 or compressed air tank to your regulator to your solenoids and so on. We're also going to go into setting up and enabling the dome control setting on your Megasquirt MS3 Pro ECU and exactly what that means. So this video is not really going to be about the OEM style or single solenoid boost control. So OEM style boost control settings is, your ECU would just use a single solenoid to be able to control how much boost pressure your car builds. With dome control or dual solenoids, your ECU controls your fill and dump solenoid off of your dome pressure sensor. So, depending on how much dome pressure your car sees or your ECU sees in the wastegate, it will either request more boost from the fill solenoid or then dump boost out of the dump solenoid. So pretty self-explanatory. What I'm going to do is I actually have everything laid out behind me. I have and I'm going to try not to mumble through all this. I kind of already am, but I already have my wastegates and everything set up behind me. I have my laptop ready to go to show you guys the dome control setting on the Tuner Studio for your MS3 Pro ECU. And I have my charge pipe and everything laid out to that way I'll be able to show you guys how I have things plumbed from my solenoids. And I will, once we're done out here, I will get into the car to show you guys the routing of how I have everything coming off of the air compressor that goes straight to my regulator, which obviously controls the maximum amount of pressure that the fill solenoid will see, which i.e. once it goes to the solenoid, it goes to the wastegate. So obviously have to have a regulator in line, and I'll be able to show you guys how I have everything routed in the car. So first thing, like I said, we'll start with the laptop. I'm going to clip this video now so that way I can spin the mic around, flip the camera, and start diving into the diagram that I have that's behind me. That is it's not the exact setup that I have on the car, but it is a very close representation of what I did on the car and how I have things plumbed and routed, and that way it can give you a visual representation or like a guide for you guys to use, just like I did, to be able to reference how you want to route things on your car. Now, you could do exactly what I've done. So the way that I've done things, I love the way that it turned out. It's very simple in my opinion. And you guys could mimic exactly what I've done with a single wastegate or dual wastegates, the way that we have on the car, which I can show you guys how you can Y or T those together safely without actually affecting, obviously the amount of boost pressure the car will build, like at the manifold, or mess up your dome pressure readings or anything like that. So you guys could mimic this, or just use the guide that I did, which we're getting ready to go into now. So I'll go ahead and flip the mic and flip the camera around, and then we'll get started. All right, everybody. So we are over at the laptop, and I will be able to show you guys now on Tuner Studio for your MS3 Pro ECU exactly where you can go to enable the dome control feature. So on the boost / VVT drop down here, the first selection is boost control settings. So once you've selected that, you can see over here where it has the system type, and when you click on that, it will actually tell you, whether, it literally says whether you're using OEM single style solenoid or dome control, which is dual solenoids. So obviously we have it enabled for dome control. So what dome control is doing is it is your ECU is controlling how much pressure that your dome on your wastegate is seeing. So your dome pressure sensor on your wastegate, which I have literally right there. So this obviously is in direct relation with how much boost you are seeing at the manifold. So this number, this maximum map, and I won't get into like specifics on it. Basically, it's not going to be one-to-one. You guys will figure out on your setup exactly how much pressure you need on the dome, on the top of the wastegate, how much pressure you need here in order to generate X amount of boost. So obviously 40 psi on the top of that wastegate is not going to give you 40 pounds of boost at the manifold. There's a little bit of a recipe that you guys will figure out, and I won't go into huge specifics, but this maximum map boost KPA, it is not like your target like your boost pressure that you've set up. It talks about maximum desired reading, which is absolute pressure. So this number here is going to be higher. Obviously, it's like a maximum boost reading. It's going to be higher than what your like boost cutoff safety, which that's another thing in this within Tuner Studio the ECU, that you can set up a overboost protection, which is what triggers your dump solenoid to empty the pressure in the wastegate. So without going into like a whole lot of specifics on that, basically, going back to your dome control setting here, and what this is doing is, like I said, it is going to target the amount of dome pressure that you are designating to the solenoid and then go on to the wastegate. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You could turn the regulator to 90 psi, really, and have the solenoid do the work and pulse to give you the desired dome pressure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. I personally just choose not to do, 70, 80 psi. I normally do 5 to 10 psi higher at the regulator than what I would want my dome pressure to be. So that's kind of a little trick that I do kind of as a safety measure. But nonetheless, getting back on track. So once you have enabled your dome control here with your dual, and like I said, you'll have dual solenoids to fill in the dump. And I'll show you guys, I'll bring up my boost map to show you, which my target map, I was having issues with the car. So my target boost pressure and my max boost pressure are about within like 2 psi. So it's really close. But obviously this target boost pressure is going to be lower than what the maximum amount that you would want to see at the manifold. So, what we're doing here is like I said, with the dual solenoids, you're having your ECU do all the work. It's taking out any complications that you guys might run into with, if you want to do manual boost control or, whatever. It just makes it, in my opinion, a lot easier for you to have the solenoids do the work. You set up your programming on your Tuner Studio, and your ECU and the solenoids do the work to control how much boost pressure you're actually going to build. So what we'll do now is I'll give you guys a visual of the diagram that I used when I started first doing this. So bear with me here because I kind of really don't have a whole lot of room. So this gives you a very bland description on how you would want to route, I should say generic, from this is basically off of Boost Leash's website, which we don't have a Boost Leash on the car, but if you did, the same principles apply. So how I routed everything on the car was, you can see here that you have your CO2 bottle or your compressed air, like, which is what we have on the car. And again, like I said, I'm going to show you guys that here in a little while after we get through the diagram. So you have your compressed air or CO2, and you have an inline regulator, which is what's here. The regulator does not have to be directly on. For CO2, I believe the regulator is directly on the bottle. It's been a while since this car's had CO2 in it. On my car, the regulator, the air compressor will only build 110 psi, and then the regulator, I have it kind of inline farther down to where I can access it inside the car. So you have your regulator in line nonetheless, and you have your fill and your dump solenoids here. So the line that is coming off of your air compressor or CO2 and regulator, right? It is going to go directly into the inlet on your fill solenoid, which is what you see here, right? Because the only job that CO2 or compressed air has is to add pressure. So it's not, you route it directly through your fill solenoid. And how I have it in my car is I have these plumbed together with an eighth inch NPT tube, like a hollow tube. It's a steel little 1/8 inch NPT tube, and I have the solenoids plumbed together in my car, and which is kind of basically what this fitting would be. I have the two plumbed together, which is what it is here, and I'll show you guys that in the car. And the line that comes off of what is in between your fill and your dump is what will go to your wastegates. And the reason you need to have it that way is for your dome control, your car needs to be able to, off of the wastegate, it needs to be able to fill pressure or dump pressure. So the line that goes to your wastegates has to have access to both of your solenoids. So after you've run to your solenoids and you begin to run to, if you wanted to do a single wastegate, you would just plumb it exactly how it has it here, where you would run your line directly to the top diaphragm, and the lower diaphragm is the boost reference. So if you were going to do a single wastegate, then you could just remove this here. I don't know why this camera keeps wanting to go sideways, but you could remove this and plumb it in exactly how that is, where you would run off of your solenoids directly to the upper diaphragm of your wastegate, and you would have to have what this is here is the second port on the upper diaphragm is for your dome pressure sensor. So on here it's showing that it is your map sensor, but it's actually going to be your dome pressure sensor. So you would have your upper diaphragm line, your dome pressure sensor, and then your boost reference that could go to your charge pipe, and I think it actually says it on here. Connect anywhere, from compressor cover to boost pipe. So we have ours set to, it runs to the charge pipe on the car, right? So that was, if you're going to want to run one wastegate, that's how you could do it. With dual wastegates, which what we have on the car right here, right? So what we did was, it does tell you that you can Y. So this line that comes off of your solenoids, which I have mine mounted in the car, you can Y it, which right here would be RY or a T. It's the same exact thing. So what we did is this divide right here, right? And you have a line going to the upper diaphragm on one wastegate and a line going to the upper diaphragm on the other wastegate, right? So as you can see here, this is what comes from the inside of the car, which I have another quick, like a little disconnect that it makes it easier for me to access it. So I have this line will go all the way to the inside of the car, and here is our little Y fitting. So this comes off the solenoid, it goes into the upper diaphragm on this wastegate and this wastegate, which is where my dome pressure sensor would be. So as you can see here, this would be like what our dome pressure sensor, like how our map or dome pressure sensor would be wired in or plumbed in on the car, right? So this is for our upper diaphragm, and then our lower diaphragm or our boost reference line is the exact same way. It just goes right here. It has another T fitting, and it runs to the lower diaphragm on this wastegate, and it goes to my charge pipe. So how I have it is it Y's here, and then it goes back into one line just like this. And the only reason I don't have it is because it's still attached with all my AN fittings on my coolant line from my radiator and water pump and everything. I didn't want to have to undo all that. So, just it's exactly how this is set up. Just this goes to the solenoids, and the lower diaphragm goes to the charge pipe, which I will show you here. So obviously these are my blow-off valves, but the line that comes off of the lower diaphragm of those two wastegates goes here on the charge pipe, on my little connect fitting, my quick connect fitting there. So whenever you are plumbing for dual wastegates, you can use your T or your Y fittings here and have and Y them here, right, together to go to a compressor cover or charge pipe, which is what we did. So this right here, it just gives you a very basic rundown of how you can plumb everything from your CO2, compressed air, whatever you decide to run on the car, and run it through your dual solenoids, right? Which you just go through your fill, go to your Y, which is the access point for your wastegates, right? And this line runs to your wastegates. Whether if you just want to do one, and you could just use this single wastegate with a dome pressure sensor, or your dual wastegate setup, you would plumb them the exact same. So now to give you guys a actual visual reference on how we have it on the car, I'll go ahead and clip this video. So how we have our tank, which is here, and I have the pressure sensor here that controls how much the compressor, which I have mounted here, it has a little circuit in there, like a pressure. It's just a pressure switch. So the circuit will break after it meets the right amount of pressure in the tank. It will break and open up, so that way it will no longer send power to the compressor. So the power goes through that to the compressor, and when this opens, it will just shut the compressor off. It won't allow it to continue to pump pressure into the air compressor. So I have this little fitting, which I can go ahead and pop that off, get that out of the way. This is actually, like we touched on this in some of my earlier videos. This is just to be able to control tire pressure. So that was just like a little quick connect fitting that I added in on there. Doesn't really have anything to do with the boost plumbing. So as you can see, I have my pressure control. Here's my pressure relief, and I have my two lines coming off of my air compressor that one runs to my air shifter and one runs to the regulator for the solenoids and wastegates. So you can see how I have everything set back here, and if you follow these lines up, right, you'll be able to see where they run, and you can see my regulators down over there. And I'm going to walk onto the other side of the car and show you guys that now. And now that we're over on this side of the car, you guys will be able to see where those compressed air lines come up and come over here to where I have both of my regulators mounted in the car. Now, I touched on this in the first video, But that is the regulator for my air shifter, which I have set to about 80 psi, so I get a nice, smooth, firm shift. That way everything engages properly. And the second line comes over here to my regulator that is for my dual solenoids and dome control. So, like I said before, I usually have this set to about 5 to 10 psi higher than what my target dome pressure would be. And that's just like a safety that I like to use instead of, in the event of a failure, I'd be sending, 80 psi to the upper diaphragm or the dome on the wastegates. So that line just runs down here, and it runs down along where you would have the lower trim piece on your car, down here. Runs up, comes over here, and goes into my fill solenoid right here, the inlet on my fill solenoid. So, like we talked about earlier, I have my solenoids joined with what you can see, I would call the manifold, but it is that 1/8 inch MPT steel pipe that goes between my fill solenoid here and my dump solenoid here. So, this line here is my wastegate line that has access to both my fill and dump the way that it would need to in order to do exactly what I need to reach target dome pressure. My dump valve dumps here on the outlet in the event that I hit over boost protection and I need to empty the pressure off of the wastegates. It would just dump right here in the car. And I did go ahead and put a mechanical pressure gauge to make sure that the pressure at the manifold here between the solenoids is the same pressure that I have set to the regulator. So that way I would be able to tell if I'm having an issue with, my regulator, or, it's just going to give me another reference point to be able to make sure that I'm hitting the right amount of dome pressure that I'm trying to reach. So, I have my wastegate line here that runs down here, and this is where it goes back into the firewall, which I'll show you guys now. Comes out there and runs over and just deadheads right here, just to make it easier on myself when I go to disconnect things. So this line runs to the upper diaphragm, to the dome on my wastegates. So where I have my wastegates mounted is down right about here, and it's a decent distance away from where I have my turbo mounted, and I have my front tire, so that way nothing's getting extremely hot. So I have my crossover that comes over, my wastegates are mounted down here, and I have that line coming, which is this line right here, that you can see that I showed earlier, that this goes to my first wastegate, and then this line goes to my second wastegate for the upper diaphragm. And then the lower diaphragm is the exact same way. It is teed just like this. And where that line runs is it runs from where I have my wastegates, and it runs up underneath this light and then back, and it goes to the underside of where I would have my charge pipe that just goes straight into my intake. So, and you guys did also get to see on my charge pipe where I have both of my blow-off valves, they just get a boost or vacuum reference that goes, and I have that straight over here on my vacuum block. So the main reference for this block is right here, that is on the back of my intake, and then my blow-off valves get one of these ports, and then my fuel pressure regulator gets the other port on this vacuum block. So, like we touched on before, you guys got to see where I have my compressed air set up, my regulator for the dome control and dual solenoids. Showed you guys the solenoids and where I have my manifold and everything, and then followed the line that goes to the top upper diaphragm on each one of my wastegates. And then obviously I showed you guys the dome pressure sensor that we have on our one wastegate. And then you have your boost reference line that just goes to our charge pipe. So one of the things you guys, like I said, are going to have to figure out is you're going to have to find the recipe for your car. I'll go ahead and turn the camera around now. You guys are going to have to find the recipe for your car, and every combo is going to be different. That X amount of dome pressure gives you X amount of boost. So, you know, what I will tell you is on MS3 Pro's Tuner Studio, there is a setting on there where you can use dome control, but the reference can be, instead of your dome pressure sensor, the reference will be your map sensor. Now, I tried that on my setup and I ran into a little bit of complications where it was overly sensitive and I could not get the car to meet target boost, not the right way. So we switched back to using the dome pressure sensor instead of the map sensor. So that is an option that you guys can do. You can go in there and you go into your boost settings and it's in one of those drop downs. You guys can figure that out if you want to use your map sensor or your dome pressure sensor. So you can do that. But you're going to have to figure out, you know, what amount of dome pressure you guys are going to need to make your target boost at the manifold. So, you know, one thing I can tell you is, you know, with this car, it was, like I said before, you know, up to about 35 PSI, it was very close to, you know, being within a couple PSI of what the dome pressure was and what the manifold pressure was. You know, but after that, you start running into, you know, your back pressure issues and even the most efficient hot side. You know, when you start trying to make 40 pounds of boost, 50 plus pounds of manifold pressure, like boost pressure, you know, you're going to run into problems where, you know, you're having to put more and more pressure on the dome to get that high amount of boost pressure. So, I mean, one of the ways that you can help yourself is when we had the car, we were heavily relying on, when we had the car at the old setup, we were heavily relying on the air compressor because we had a light spring in the car. It was like a 3-pound wastegate spring. So it's not as essential with CO2 because it's so much, it's way higher pressure than compressed air. With CO2, it's a little bit easier and you don't have to rely on, you know, the air compressor and the air that is in the tank and everything to meet your desired dome pressure target. So, you know, it's a little bit easier in that aspect with CO2, but with CO2, I was having to constantly fill bottles. So, I did that like 2 or 3 times and I was kind of already fed up with it. So we switched to compressed air. And the thing with compressed air is you have to think of, whenever you make a pass, it's like a slow leak. So you're heavily relying on the pressure that is in your air tank that I have mounted in the back of the car, which you guys saw. You're heavily relying on the pressure that is already in that tank and at the regulator, which then goes to your solenoids and goes to your wastegates. You're relying on that amount of pressure to stay constant. So whenever I make a pass, I can hear my compressor kick on at the end of the run, because when my engine has load and I'm trying to keep the same amount of dome pressure to create the boost pressure that I want at the manifold, my compressor, in order to do that, will kick on and run in order to meet that desired pressure. So it's like a slow leak, and it is how it acts. So basically, the best way that you can help yourself, if you want to run a lighter spring, which is what we were doing with the car because it's a no prep car, and you know, we have the ability to where I can leave in first or second, and there's a few different things that I can do where I can run a higher spring. So basically what I'm getting at is, if you want to switch if you want to run compressed air and you want to switch from a lighter spring to a heavier spring, you're not going to be so much relying on the pressure, you know, that is in your air circuit and what your compressor can do at that time. Because with your spring being stiffer, instead of now having to add 45, let's just say 45 PSI on the dome to make 30 pounds of boost. If you have a 15-pound spring, instead of having to add 45 pounds, maybe now you only need to add 25, 30 PSI on the dome. And, you know, the recipe might not be exact, but let's just say ballpark, right? So you're going to help yourself out by doing that. The downside is then on a bad surface, you're really kind of going to hang yourself out to dry, because if you don't have the ability to really tame the car, you know, tame it down, and you can do it, despite what people may think, you can make less pressure than what your wastegate spring is. You do it all. You can do it all with timing or RPM. You can do that, but that's kind of overcomplicating things. So, you know, running a lighter spring is always going to be better for, you know, a crappier surface. But when you really want to start making steam and you need to run high amounts of boost pressure, you know, make high amounts of boost pressure at the manifold, running a stiffer spring with compressed air is really going to help you. You know, you just have to have the ability to be able to tame that down if need be. So, you know, all that being said, that basically wraps up our video on the boost plumbing for dome control dual solenoids on your MS3 Pro turbo car. So all those principles are actually still the exact same for Holley or Fuel Tech. You know, we touched on earlier that our solenoids are using high current outputs or inputs, whatever, outputs, inputs. They're using high current. We use high current on all of our solid state relay. All of our solenoids are high current, but all the principles would still apply. So, you know, the next video that we're going to be filming is going to be picking up where we left off on the engine build. So we're waiting on cylinder heads to come in. Once we get the cylinder heads in, and the head gaskets and everything, we're going to be, you know, doing the top half of the motor. So, you know, we'll start filming that, putting everything together, and then get the motor ready to set in the car so we can start putting everything together. And then we'll be filming part 3 of our electrical. So I'll be able to go through all of our inputs and outputs on the car and trigger everything and show you guys how all that works. So plenty of videos to come, so you guys stay tuned, and don't forget to, you know, visit the page, visit the channel, like and subscribe, guys. Thank you.